Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. This is the second part of my video running through what I put in my backpack. Just as a reprise, my backpack, my Atom Pack, has a Osprey sack in it, and the things that I packed in my bag, very first thing in that orientation is my quilt right at the bottom of the pack. Then I had a Thermarest pad, my pillow for the first bit, which I didn't use that often, was a silk liner. Then I had my clothes bag. Yeah, a fair amount of comment about my clothes bag. Yeah, I did only have one outfit, but I was very quick at wearing my waterproof trousers and waterproof top if it was very windy or wet. Now, in the early part of the trail, when it was cold, I was wearing two tops. A merino undertop, which I eventually got rid of because it was just too hot. But even in those circumstances, going over Rowan Mountains or Rowan area, when it was really cold, wearing my waterproof top produced enough heat for my body, so I didn't need loads and loads of clothes. It's something I've learned over the years in the UK, and I hoped that it would be the case in the US, and it transpired it was. So that's my clothes, then my puffy, and then my first aid kit and toiletries. That then meant that I had my sack, my Osprey sack, with everything I wanted to keep absolutely dry. The very first thing that goes into my rucksack outside the inner Osprey pack is my tent. My tent is made up of two bags. It's a Nemo Dragonfly single person tent, but it's split over two bags. The inner in its own bag, and the fly and my ground sheet in a separate bag. I'll explain why in a moment. But the Nemo itself, it's quite difficult. A long time ago, researching lightweight single person tents in the UK, there's lots of bivvy bag shapes and quite small tents, but I wanted something I could sit up in. I bought this from a German website. It was on sale, probably the last one they had. It was quite a long time ago, but it's the only tent I've ever used, and as it seems to do the job, I thought, well, I'll bring it on the AT. Now, the inner, what can I say about a Dragonfly? It does have some pockets, has two pockets above you. I always put my glasses in the closest one to me, and my headlamp in the second one with the strap hanging down, so I knew that if I woke up in the middle of the night I could just grab a strap and then I had a light. Thereafter, they clearly try and save weight by cutting out part of the fly, and so if you pull it out far enough, the water comes down and it drips, and it doesn't drip on the inner. It worked. I only had 2 times in the whole trip where water got into my tent, and then it was only a very small amount at the foot end of my tent, and that I could deal with that perfectly well. The stuff sack that has my fly and my ground sheet in it, the reason why it has its own sack is it will get wet. The fly will get wet. There are times when you get up and there's condensation on your fly and it just won't dry. Well, if I pack it away in its own stuff sack, I don't care how wet it is. I can pull it out later in the day, dry it. I can turn the bag inside out and dry that as well. But that's why it has its own stuff sack. The Tyvek is just a rectangular piece what I did do is I made sure this was permethrined. I did it twice, I think, over the whole trip, because it's never washed or anything, so twice is probably enough. Permethrin both sides, so this goes on the ground. The sort of bugs you're trying to and ticks that you're trying to ward against, they're mainly in leaves. That's my understanding from listening to podcasts about the subject. So the Tyvek goes on the ground, it's on leaves. There is the side that is touching the ground is permethrined, the side that is touching the bottom of my tent is permethrined. There's a good chance nothing's going to happen. My fly is also permethrined in case bugs come from other directions. And then on my inner, just the base of the inner is permethrined. So in its own stuff sack, I'll get it out for a second. Here's the fly. Stuff it back in. I've never rolled up these in any particular fashion, I've just stuffed them in the sack. And my Tyvek in their own little stuff sack. So that goes into my bag, and the other portion of the tent goes in the bag, and they sit in the bag side by side like that and fit absolutely perfectly. Within the atom pack there is a back plate that sits inside the atom pack. You can see it online. When I've packed everything bar my food, everything comes up to the top of that inner plate. So the only thing sitting above it is my food. So just to give you an idea about how high everything goes. So that's my tent. The next thing I put in is my paracord. This is for my bear hang. The various ways you can hang your bag when you're outside. You either have a bear box, and if there was one I would use it, or you'd have to hang your bag, and there were two ways of hanging the bag. Some of the shelters that I stayed at had like this elongated hat stand where you had to have a pole and you'd maneuver your bag up onto a peg. That was about as inefficient as you can get and pretty useless, and I hated using them. But otherwise, the standard, throw your line over a horizontal bough and pull up your bag. That's how I dealt with it. So I had my paracord, and to be fair, no matter how many times I neatly wound it up in the morning, it was always a mess in the evening. The second bit of kit to do with the paracord was actually my buff. Now, I wore this buff just as a normal buff. I used it to wipe down the inside of the tent sometimes, but it was actually my rock sack. So all you do is you just put a rock inside, you have the two ends, the rock sticking in the middle, turn the two ends round and tie around there, and your rock sitting here. And that's how I did my bear hangs. That's where my rock was. So the next bit of kit that I put in my bag was my electronics bag. Now I'm going to do a separate video on this because there's actually quite a lot of detail about this, but I started off with a fanny pack which had some electronics in it, and my wallet and things like that, and a few snacks and chapstick and all sorts of things. And I realized that most of these items could actually go in my bag, and it wasn't necessary to have the fanny pack. I then realized that when you reach a town, oh, just had a fly. Whew. Ooh, a bit of extra protein. Never mind. When you reached a hostel or a hotel or a town or whatever, or even if you're just going through a town and going into a restaurant, the two things that you need are your charging kit and your wallet, or your money, or however you. So having everything in one bag meant I just had to pull out one bag. So within here, if I open up the bag, would be my wallet. This is a waterproof case for my mobile that in the end didn't really work. Just as it's the correct place to put it. That's my headlamp. I had a charging, or a power pack, sorry, one power pack, one plug, US plug, and a series of cables. Now there is one cable that goes with my power pack, and then I had two other cables, both for my mobile phone. One was a USB connection and one was a C connection, so no matter where I was, I knew I could charge my mobile phone. So this, sometimes it was the last thing I packed in my pack, sometimes it was a bit further down. It just depends. If you know that you're not going to visit a town that day and there was no need to have your wallet or any electricals, then it could go further down my pack. But if I knew I was going into town, it was often the last thing I packed. But for the purpose of this video, more often than not, that would be the next thing I packed. Then after that, the next thing was a roll of toilet paper in its own Ziploc bag. That would be the next thing I packed. On the inside, not on the outside. And that's deliberate because it doesn't take much moisture to ruin a roll of toilet paper, so that's why it's on the inside. The final big sack I put on the inside of my bag, and it was always the last thing, and it was as high as it can go, and it is actually the heaviest thing in my bag, is my food bag. So if I open up the food bag, it has a carabiner on it by default because that's hanging up for your bear hang. But if I look in my food bag, or what I call my food bag, this will have, it's actually a second food bag, this will have my pot and a cloth of some sort and all my food. Now I do have some bits of food left over, but people will recognise these sorts of things. But essentially in here would be my food and my pot. And within my pot, I would have, if I open it all up, I have a cosy that I created to keep the pot warm. It is a pot. I'm not a cold soaker. I have a small Soto stove that would sit on the gas canister. Gas canister is about the same size as this mug, so that would sit inside my pot. I have a Bic lighter. This is the same Bic lighter I started with, so I had one Bic lighter this size for the whole trail. Now I would always boil water in here, and I would pour the dried food into here, so I would always have just the one pot which I would wash. And at the moment I've got a just packing it away, or unpacking it when I got home and packing it away again. I've just used a Ziploc bag to stop the mug rattling inside, and that's exactly what I would do for the gas canister. And that would be everything I had in my food bag. Now, just a quick thing on my food bag. I did start with a pack from Hilltop Packs, suitably named, and that was my food bag, and it was just one bag, and when it was full it would sit in that orientation in the top of my rucksack. But the clip broke, and as it's all sewn in and it was no longer of any use, the clip actually broke on those bear hang devices that I can't remember which state they're in, but it's like on a long It's like a huge hat stand, and it just, you know, 3 meters and 2 meters, 3 meters, 3 meters in the air, 3 yards in the air, and you have this long pole that you balance this on, and you put it on a little hook on the top. That got damaged on that, so this would not close. I wouldn't be able to use it as my food bag. So in my bounce box, I actually had brought with me 3 little sacks, and I used 2 of them for my food. So I had one that was breakfast and lunch, and one was the evening meal and the cook pot. And that made it easy when I was taking food out of my bag. I would just take the yellow one out in the middle of the day, and I didn't have to take this one out. But that is the last thing that's in my rucksack, inside my rucksack. So, last thing inside my rucksack. So when I got to camp, I would open my rucksack, I'd take my food bags out, put them on the floor, and I'm pretty much, doesn't take 2 seconds to go past 2 of the other bags, and I've got my tent out. So everything else is still in the bag. It's not come out. It's not impacted by rain if it's raining. And to be fair, if it was raining really hard, what I would do, it's only happened twice, is I actually left my bag in the shelter anyway and just took the tent and put that up and came back for my bag. But the idea being that you take stuff out of your bag as you use it. Well, during the day, I needed to use my lunch food, so that would be at the top of my bag. So I'll just open the bag, take it out. My electronics and wallet bag, without much trouble, I can just pull it out and put it back in again. So everything in the bag was waterproofed. I appreciate I've got lots of little sacks with things in them, but that helps me picture in my mind all the things that I need to put in my bag. So that is the balance of what goes inside my bag. Now on the outside, I did say in part 1 that anything on the outside of my bag, I was happy for it to get wet. So starting with one pocket on one side, didn't really matter which pocket it is. This side would have my tent pegs and my tent poles. Now just a quick story on the tent poles. I had struggled for a long time with, I'll just get out some tent poles just so you can see what on earth I'm on about. So on the tent poles, this little junction here where the pole goes over the little knob there, this was degrading. This little piece here was degrading and it cracked, and so I was able to cut it off and repair it with duct tape. That kept the tent poles usable for about 200-300 miles, but eventually they failed, and for my tent to work it does need the fly to be away from the inner. I mean, it's the same for every tent, but it was getting more and more difficult for that to be the case. So I contacted Nemo online. I took some pictures and sent them to them. The online form they get you to fill in, if you put the word urgent in the subject line, they assume you are a thru hiker. Well, it took them 3 days to reply. In those 3 days, I had 2 shelters and a hostel stay. When they did reply, they shipped out new poles within 24 hours to a US address. Old School, who I walked the first 700 miles with before he unfortunately got an injury, graciously accepted them at his house and then drove them out to me. So I was really only without a tent for about a week. But that's the story about the poles. But going back to the bag, on one side, yes, it has this nice pocket. So tent pegs go in upside down, so if they ever opened, never did, then they would fall into the pocket, and then the tent poles in themselves. So that's all that was in one side. So the other side pocket, I had two things. I had my water treatment equipment and my little spade. I'll start with the spade. Yeah, you need to dig a cat hole if you want to go to the toilet on trail and you're not near a privy. The only difference that I did is I wrapped a whole load of duct tape around the handle, so at least it didn't hurt your hand too much, and it also provided me with a source of duct tape. So that was one thing in the outside pocket. Second thing was my water treatment. Now early on, for the first, I don't know, 1,200 miles or so, I was using a platypus gravity filter, only because that's what I had in the UK and there was little point, I didn't see the point in buying a new one. It worked perfectly well in camp. It doesn't really matter if it takes 10 minutes to filter 2 litres of water, because you've got so much time in camp. Where it was an issue was on trail, where you wanted to stop and get water. As you went further and further north, the weather in general got warmer and you needed more and more water, and it was just taking too long stopping at creeks, getting some water, waiting for it to be filtered. And for some of the time, some of the colleagues I was with allowed me to use their Sawyer Squeeze just to get some water. So not sure where it was, but eventually I ended up with a Sawyer Squeeze and a sea-knot bag. Now what I didn't have and have never bought are the bottles that people seem to use, SmartWater bottles, for their water. I've just had normal bottles that you'd buy soda in, and Gatorade bottles and things like that. So that's my water treatment kit, and that went in one of the outside pockets. You'll notice I don't have a great deal in the outside pockets deliberately because they're going to get wet, and my spade, and that was broadly it. One other thing that I put in the outside, and I don't have it at the moment, so I've just got something from the house, was bug spray, or rather bug cream I tended to use from Sawyer, whatever their products are, and that would go in the outside, and that would go on the same side as my water treatment and spade. So that's all I put in the 2 side pockets. Now you'll see in all the videos that I had a water bottle in each of these top shoulder straps. The bottles were just normal soda bottles, and I swapped them in and out every 2 or 3 weeks. I just wanted them to be a certain size, 500 milliliters, 750 milliliters, whatever the size was. And sometimes when you got some trail magic and there were Gatorade bottles, then I'd swap one of those in. I didn't really bother getting specialist bottles or anything else. These were just recyclable plastic bottles that used to have soda in them. The next thing in my bag is the pocket on the back. Now again, bear in mind, I've said every time that things on the outside of my bag, I don't mind getting wet. Well, what would be in here were 3 things. First thing was my bug net hat. I've used this many times in the UK. I've used it in Iceland, and it's worked really, really well. It's just a hat with a bug net on it and a sun bit on the back. It cost about £10 from Decathlon website. I never used it, never once. But I did take it with me, and this was always at the bottom of the back pocket. The next thing that went in there were my waterproofs. Now, I have waterproof trousers. Just got to find the name of the waterproof trousers. Where are they? What was the name of them? Oh yeah. These are Marmot. A couple of things I like about this particular pair of trousers. The very first thing is they're waterproof trousers, waterproof pants. They really are waterproof. That's their sole job, I'm not really bothered that they probably weigh more than others. Their sole job is to keep water out, and they do. And the reason I know this is every time I've worn them in rain, even if it's rained for a whole day, when I get to camp and take them off, my shorts are completely dry. And as I've said before, I've only got one pair of shorts, so they need to be dry. So I needed a pair of rain pants that kept out the rain. Now I've had these for quite a long time. The unfortunate thing is they got damaged on the AT, so I might have to buy a new pair. But one of the features I really like about them is they have a zip that goes all the way the length of the leg. So when you put them on, you don't have to take your shoes off, and it's very quick to put them on. You just put your feet through, down with the zip. So I would leave them with the zips open, in, wound up, rolled up, in that back pocket. The other thing I had in the back pocket was my waterproof jacket. Now unfortunately, I left my waterproof jacket in the US. There are pictures of it on quite a lot of the videos, but I've got another one here that just for the purpose of showing stuffing it into a pocket. But my waterproof jacket, again, it has one purpose, and that's to keep the water out. Now the one thing with jackets is there is a huge trade-off between it being completely waterproof and it being a reasonable weight. And pretty much every jacket everyone will wear, eventually water will get through. Well, I never experienced that on the AT. I have experienced it elsewhere, but the jacket had pit zips which were permanently open, but it would be in the pocket in the back, and obviously if it's raining they're not in there. But I did carry those the whole way and did use them, not only for rain but for wind. When there was high wind, I'd often put my jacket on, and my jacket and my undertop were generally enough to keep me warm. Everybody's different. I have found over the years that sweat seems to wick away better than rainwater, which is why I try and keep myself dry and accept the fact that it's uncomfortable and you get sweaty. The only other things that I had on my pack, I have a bit of one of these towels. This is cut up pretty roughly. You can see it's not particularly straight. That was cut up with my little scissors, and then I just cut a little hole, and that goes on a small carabiner on the top of my shoulder strap, and that's what I use to wipe my face whilst I'm walking. So that's one extra thing. The last two things I should say on my kit are cheap Crocs, camp shoes. I never use these as camp shoes. These were in my bounce box up until the end of New Hampshire, when I took them out because people had said there were an awful lot of river crossings in Maine, and I didn't want to get my shoes wet, and I didn't really want to go across barefooted across rivers. So I only carried these for the last state, so for the last 270, 280 miles. I'm not certain exactly where the last time I interacted with my bounce box, but these were in my bounce box virtually the whole time. Now these are exceptionally cheap. I actually got them from Sports Direct for $5.99, so £6, $8. They only have one purpose, and that was to get me across rivers. And these would be on my pack. You got these nice orange straps on the back. They would just be strapped in, and I'd have one carabiner that then attached them, and they would just be there. But that was only for the very last state, and that was really only for river crossings. everybody is different. Some people need camp shoes, take camp shoes. Later videos I will talk about foot care, but I have never used camp shoes. Those places where you can go barefoot, I'll go barefoot. Otherwise I just undo my laces and loosen everything up and go around camp in my normal walking shoes. Very last piece of equipment is my walking stick. These are pretty expensive. This is my purchase, probably 2019 I think, but they're Helinox. They're lightweight, they're in 3 bits. So if I, they're in 3 bits, so if I take them out, you can actually make them a bit smaller. This was my mistake with the bounce box, because I thought I could get these in the bounce box, and the answer is you couldn't. But they're a 3-piece. They just clip together, and they have markings on here as for how long they are, and you just twist and they're fine. Twist them up and now they're solid, and away you go. So some places in Maine I carried these, and they would be sitting next to my tent poles in the side pocket, but pretty much the whole journey I had these and used these. Vermont was probably the state where these never out of my hands. There's so much rock hopping and going through mud and everything where you need your poles. I don't know how anybody does it without poles. Now the only other thing I'll say, mildly controversial it seems, people don't use the straps. Why do you think the manufacturer puts them on there? You know, you put your hand up from the bottom, twist round, and there you are. I'm not holding. I don't hold it. There's no pressure on my forearm of gripping my pole, and all the pressure is taken on this nice little fleshy bit. Doesn't hit any veins or anything. I don't know. Everyone's different, but there are videos out there about how to properly use these. About 5-6 years ago, I was sort of accosted by a Norwegian woman on a ski holiday saying I was using my poles incorrectly, and this is how you use the strap. My only extra piece on this whole subject of trekking poles is, why would the manufacturer put a strap on? There are much cheaper ways of having a clip to enable you to hang it up. So why would they actually put a clip on? And the answer, a strap on, and the answer is because it's an integral part of your trekking pole. But that was the only other piece of equipment that I took on the trail. So, excluding food, excluding water, my full pack weighs about 20 pounds. So that's my pack, my clothes, my tent, everything. So everything excluding my food bag, which has my gas canister in it. So my food bag and my water is 20 pounds. And so I rarely got above 32 pounds as the overall weight of my pack. A number of people that I hiked with at various times, excluding food and water, their packs are over 30 pounds. It doesn't actually matter in the end, because you've got to carry it. So if that's what they want, and those are the things they want to bring with them, fine, they have to carry them. What is perfectly clear as people went through the trail is pretty much everybody I know, by the time they got to about 1,000 miles, they were brutal with what they took and what they discarded. If they didn't use something, they just discarded it. And I was the same. So in a later video on various subjects, I will go through all the items that I discarded, that I started with, that I got rid of. So the pack that I've gone through now is what I finished with. And that's it.